to your will. I will trust you and obey. When your spirit speaks to me, with my whole heart I agree, and my answer, yes. Everybody say, the soul to your will. My very soul cries out, yes, my Lord. When your spirit speaks to me,
and I am the clay. Mold me and make me after my will. While I am waiting, yielded and stay.
Everybody say yes, yes, to your will and to your way. Yes, Lord, I'm the way I can trust you. When your spirit speaks to me, all agree, and it's a little bit, yes.
Everybody say yes.
Good morning, Israel. Good morning, Israel. Good morning. This is Michael, and just wanted to tell a story today. It's a very pertinent story, and you'll be. And first, let me just back up and say that I don't do this to proclaim that I'm a pastor, a preacher, or anything. I'm just an old slave, a field hand, working in the fields, never been a house Negro. So I'm speaking as such, and that's all. I'm just telling a story. Just like the old timers used to tell the stories of our foreparents back then, I'm going to tell you a story today. But this one is coming out of the book of Judith. If you ever get an Apocrypha, which I do suggest, just read the book of Judith, the book of Tolbert, and there's a lot of good stories in these books. And this is just one story that I want to read. But before I do, I want to start off with the preamble, which is Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4. And that is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thine soul, and with all thine might. So, what this story tells us, and this is where I want to talk about today, is that everybody in the world knows that we are the children of the Most High God, the jewels upon the earth, God's jewels. They know that. And so I'm going to start off reading Psalms chapter 83, which our King David prophesied about how the countries of the world would form a confederacy, which they call the United Nations, which used to be called the League of Nations. And this is one of the biggest secrets there is that the American Negro and the Latins of North America and South America are the jewels of God's crown, or of the earth. So I'm going to start with Psalms 83, and I'm going to read a few verses, and I'll be expounding on them briefly as I go through it. But it says in Psalms 83, verse 1, It says, keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thine peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult. A tumult is a large, grand noise. So it says, for lo, God, your enemies are making a loud noise. And they that hate thee, or they that hate you, have lifted up their heads. And they have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. So they're taking crafty counsel. They're creating a strategy and a scheme against God's people. And they have consulted against his hidden ones. And why are we the hidden ones? Because who we are have been hidden from us and hidden from the world. And they have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And so what did they do? We've been scattered through slavery all over the world. There's Hebrews all over the world, in Iraq, in Iran, in Russia, everywhere, in Japan, in China, there's Hebrews. As a lady once told me, anywhere you go, you'll find a fly in the milk. And they said, we want to cut them off from being a nation, so that the name of Israel would be no more in remembrance. You'll notice that they don't call anybody on this earth Israel anymore, or Israelites. Those people who are claiming to be us, they themselves say that they are Israelis. They don't say that they're Israelites. They won't tell that lie. But they'll say we are Israelis. Why? Because they live in the land of Israel. But they are not Israelites because they don't have the blood of Jacob running through their veins. We are the Israelites. We have the blood of Jacob running through our veins. And so we see that they have conformed a confederate against thee, and that confederate today is called the United Nations. Now, it says, in the tabernacles of Edom, those are the people who are in Israel right now. The Ishmaelites, those are the people, the Arabs. The Moabs, those are the Chinese. The Hagarenes, those are more people in of the Arab nation. You've got the Gebal, the Ammons. We know the Ammons are the Japanese people. Amalek, those are the Amalekites. The Philistines are Africans. The Tyre are Africans. Yes. These people have formed nations, have come together to conceal who we are. Now, they know who we are. We're the only one that don't, and I can prove this. It goes all the way back that they know who we are. And with that, I'm going to go to the story of Judith, and I'm going to briefly go through that so that you'll understand what that's about and who we are and who they are and how they know who we are. So in the first book of Judith, chapter 1, it says, in the 12th year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who reigned in Nineveh, the great cities, in the days of Arphaxad, which reigned over the Medes in Ecbatane. Chapter verse 7. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, sent unto all that dwelt in Persia, and all that dwelt westward, and to those that dwelt in Syria and Damascus, and Libanus and Antelabus, Banus, and to all that dwelt on the sea coast, and to among the nations of Carmel, Galaad, and the higher Galilee, and the greater plains of Esdraelon, and to all that were in Samaria, and the cities beyond their Jordan, unto Jerusalem, and to Bethane, and to Chelis, and to Cades, and the river of Egypt, and Taphanes, and Rameses, and the land of Gesem, until you come beyond Tanis and Memphis, which was in Egypt, and to all the inhabitants of Egypt until you come to the borders of Ethiopia. But all the inhabitants of the land made light of the commandment of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians. Neither went they with him to battle, for they were not afraid of him. Yea, he was before them as one man, and they sent away his ambassadors from them without effect, with disgrace. And in the 18th year, the 22nd day of the first month, there was talk in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, that he should and he would avenge himself on all the earth. So he called unto him all his officers and his nobles, and communicated with them in secret council, and concluded the afflicting of the whole earth out of his own mouth. Then he decreed to destroy all flesh that did not obey him, the commandments of his mouth. And he had ended his counsel. Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Assyrians, called the Olophernes and the chief captain of his army, which was next to him, and said unto him, Thus says the great king, the Lord of the whole earth. Back then there were a king of kings. The king of the king was the king over all the whole earth. He was the chairman of the board. And behold, thou shalt go from my presence, and take with thee men that trusteth in their own strength, and footmen 120,000, and the number of horses and their riders 12,000. So he took 132,000 men and sent them to destroy everyone who would not obey his commandments as Lord of the earth. So they and all the country round about received them with garlands and dances and timbrels. Yet he did not cast down their frontiers and cut down their groves, for he had decreed to destroy all the gods of the land, that all the nations should worship Nebuchadnezzar only, and that all the tongues and tribes should call upon him as God, because he became the God of the earth. And he came against Israel near Judea, over against the strait of Judea. And the children of Israel dwelt in Judea, and heard all that the Holofernes and the chief captain of Nebuchadnezzar. And Holofernes was the chief captain, he was his 5-star general, of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Assyrians, had done to all the nations, and after what manner he had spoiled all their temples and brought them to naught. And so when they talk about spoiling them, he meant burned them down, destroyed them. Therefore they were exceedingly afraid of him, and were troubled for Jerusalem and for the temple of the Lord their God. And the children of Israel did, in verse 8, and this is chapter 4, and the children of Israel did as Joachim the high priest had commanded them, and with the ancients of all the people of Israel which dwelt in Jerusalem, that every man of Israel cried to God with great fervence and great vehemency, and did humble their souls. But they and their wives and their children and their cattle and every stranger and hireling and the servants brought with money both sackcloth upon their loins. Thus every man and every woman and little children and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before the temple, and cast ashes on their heads, and spread out sackcloth before the face of the Lord. And they also put the sackcloth on the altar. So the high priest Joachim made everybody come to the temple and pray. They covered themselves with ashes and put on sackcloths. And so that meant they humbled themselves to the utmost, because in their sight they knew that they were only dirty rags in the sight of the Lord. So they dressed as dirty rags in the sight of the Lord with ashes and sackcloth. And they cried to the God of Israel with all one consent earnestly, that he would not give their children for a prayer, and their wives for spoil, and that the city of their inheritance to destruction, and the sanctuary of the profanation, and the reproach for all the nations to rejoice. So God heard their prayers and looked upon their afflictions, and people fasted many days in all of Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord. And this is a note here. It says in verse 12, and said, they cried to God, all of Israel, with one consent, earnestly, and he would not give their children for prey, and their wives for spoil, and the cities of their inheritance for destruction, to destruction. So they prayed that their children and their wives would not go into slavery, and that the city of Jerusalem, which was their inheritance, that they would keep. And this is what happened to us. We did not pray. We did not humble ourselves. The children, as we noted, and we know upon historically, the children went into slavery. The women were spoiled. They were raped. And everyone went into slavery. And our inheritance, which was Jerusalem, was given to another people. And so this is an example of what we should be doing now. And so God heard their prayers, and he will hear ours. And so God heard their prayers and looked upon their afflictions. And the people fasted many days in Judea and Jerusalem before the sanctuary of the Lord Almighty. Chapter 5. And this is what I want to go into that proves that the people of the whole world know who we are, and they know our history, and they know what it takes to keep us out of God's will, so that he will not hear our prayers and afflictions. Chapter 5. And then it was declared by Holofernes, the chief captain of the army of Assur, that the children of Israel had prepared for war, and had shut up the passages on the hill country, and had fortified all the tops of the high hills, and had laid impediments in the champion country. Now remember, Jerusalem had heard that everybody else had given up because the cities were destroyed, and so they said they just laid down everything and invited General Holofernes in and the army of Assyria in to spoil their city. And Jerusalem did not do that because they had prayed to the Lord, and the Lord had heard their prayer and spoke to them and told them to fortify your walls. So when he saw that all this was happening, that the children of Israel did not just lay down like he suspected them, it says in verse 2, wherewith he was very angry, and called to the princes of Moab, the Chinese, and the captains of Ammon, the Japanese, and all the governors of the seacoast. And he said unto them, tell me now, ye sons of Canaan, who is this people who dwelt in the hill country? What are the cities that they inhabit? And what is the multitude of their army? And wherein is their power and strength? And what king set over them and the captains of their army? So he's asking, tell me all about these people. I want to know who are their king, what's their army like. I don't want to know everything. Who is their city, just everything. And he says, I want to know really why have they determined not to come and meet me more than all the inhabitants of the west, because remember, everyone else laid down and gave him everything that he wanted. Then said Achior, the captain and the sons of Ammon, this was the captain of the Japanese army, let my lord now hear a word from the mouth of thy servant, and I will declare unto thee the truth concerning this people which dwelt near thee, the inhabitants of the hill countries, and there shall no lie come out of the mouth of thy servant. So this Japanese captain is telling the general Holofernes, under the king of Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to tell you all about these people, and I will not tell you the truth. I will tell you the truth, and I will not tell you a lie. In verse 6 of chapter 5, it says, these people are the descendants of the Chaldeans. They even know where we come from. And they sojourned heretofore in Mesopotamia, because they would not follow the gods of their fathers, which were in the land of captivity. So he says, because we would not obey God, we dwelt in the desert, and we just wandered. He says, for they left the way of their ancestors and worshiped the God. They left the way of their ancestors and worshiped the God of heaven, whom they knew, And they cast them from the face of their gods, and they fled into Mesopotamia and sojourned many days. Then their God commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned, to go into the land of Canaan, where they dwelt, where increased with gold and silver, and very much cattle. When the famine covered the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt. And I'm going to back up because I was mistaken. They went all the way back to Abraham. They went all the way back to Abraham in Mesopotamia after he left the after Abraham left his home of Ur. Chaldea, where they worshipped a lot of false gods. Well, anyway, their God commanded them to depart from the place where they sojourned and go into the land of Canaan, where they dwelt, where they increased with gold and silver and were very much cattle. And Abraham was rich. But when the famine covered the land of Canaan, they went down into Egypt, where Joseph was. As they sojourned there while they nourished and became a great multitude. When they left Mesopotamia and went to Egypt, there was only 66 people. The 12 sons, their children, Jacob and his wife. And when they left Egypt, there was over 600,000. And says, they sojourned there in Egypt while they nourished and became a great multitude, so that one could not number their nation. Therefore the king of Israel rose up against them and dealt subtly with them, and brought them low, and labored them with brick, and made them slaves. And they cried unto their God, and he smote them in the land of Egypt with incurable plagues, and the Egyptians cast them out of their sight. And the God dried the Red Sea before them, and brought them into Mount Sinai, the caged barns, and cast forth all that dwelt in the wilderness. So they dwelt in the land of the Amorites, and they destroyed by their strength all the Ezebins, and passed over Jordan, possessed all the country. And they cast before them the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Girgashites, the Shechemites, and all that in the country, and they dwelt for many days. So it's saying that God allowed us to conquer all of those people. And while they sinned not before their God, they prospered, because their God hated iniquity and was with them. But when they departed from the way which he had appointed them, were destroyed in many battles, very sore, and they lay captives in the land, and they not theirs, and the temple of their God was cast down to the ground, and their cities were taken by enemies. So I think he's talking about after Joshua. After Joshua, we decided that we were going to follow the false gods after we were taken into our first captivity. But now they returned unto their God, and they come up from the places where they were scattered, and have possessed Jerusalem, where their sanctuary is, and are seated in the hill country, for it was desolate. Now therefore the Lord, my Lord and Governor, if there be any error in this people, and they sin against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin. And let's go up, and we shall overcome them. So they know how to keep us in slavery, how to defeat us. It says, if there be any error in this people, and they sin against their God, let us consider that this shall be their ruin. Let us go up, and we shall overcome them. Verse 21, but if there is no iniquity in their nation, let the Lord now pass by. Let now my Lord pass by. So he's telling them, if these people are not sinning, and there's no iniquity, we should just pass by them. Because if we don't, their Lord, it says, lest their Lord defend them, and their God be for them, and we become a reproach before all the world. So he's telling them, we got to go. We can't go by them. We can't bother them. Because if we do, their God is going to fight for them. The whole world will know how we were defeated, and we will be an embarrassment. And when Anchior had finished these sayings, the people standing round about the tent murmured, and the chief men of Hophrons, all that dwelt in the seaside in Moab, spake that he should kill them. So the story is that he knew. This Japanese person knew way back, way back, who we were. They write their history books and they keep them. They give us the history that they want us to know, but the history, the real true history, they keep to themselves. They know who we are, but they choose not to tell us who we are. They know what will bring us out of slavery, and they know what to do to keep us in slavery. So as long as we continue to sin against the Lord thy God, and don't turn to him and pray and bow ourselves and humble ourselves, we shall continue to be in slavery. So the first thing that they've done is made us want to eat pork. That is bad. But even worse than pork is seafood. As I talked about it earlier, seafood, according to Leviticus chapter 11, is an abomination. If it doesn't have skins, if it doesn't have scales and fins, we are not supposed to eat it. So that means your shrimp, your lobster, your crayfish, your oysters, we're not supposed to eat it. So as long as they keep us eating that stuff, God will never listen to us. Our prayers will go unanswered. So let us now start looking at the dietary laws and try to start living according to the dietary laws. And let us also pray. Turn toward God as it was talked about in 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 47. Let us look at that. But anyway, that's the story that I wanted to tell you. And let us take heed. It says in a lot of places of the Bible, he that has ears, let him hear. With that, we'll just go on and listen to sign out with a little bit of some good music to get our minds right, because that's what we've got to do. We got to get our minds right. Turn back to the Most High God, so that when the time comes, we can be saved. There will only be a remnant, according to Isaiah chapter 14. Only a remnant, Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11. Only a remnant of the Jews, the children of Israel, shall turn back to God. I hope that you will be one of those. Only 1/3 of our nation will go back to Jerusalem.